Our next speaker is someone that when I see her writing and when I see her on a performance bill, something lights up inside. So please welcome to the stage with her story from wellness wanker to wellness skeptic. It's Pixie Turner.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. As you can probably tell from my accent, I am not from around here. I made the arduous journey up from London yesterday. So for those of you who did the same, I feel your pain. So I'm going to be doing a slightly different talk today. My name is Pixie. Yes, that is my real name. And I was a wellness wanker. I was one of those people who you see posting these kinds of images online. I was posting a huge amount of misinformation online. I was posting a huge amount of absolute bollocks, and I was so deeply convinced of my own beliefs, it took quite some time to get away from them. And I think hopefully you'll find my story interesting and see how interesting it is how I've managed to get from one stage to where I am now. And hopefully there might be some interesting questions. Hopefully you'll find some of it amusing, and hopefully it'll be a bit insightful to kind of understand a little bit more about why people fall for these kinds of nutrition myths in particular. So if we talk about my story, we have to go back to when I was 19, which is not that long ago, really. I'm 25 now, so I was in my second year of uni at this point, and this is the point where I had a health scare. So my dad was in hospital one day because he had a suspected heart attack. Luckily, there was nothing wrong. He was totally fine. But it was found that he had very, very high cholesterol. And his mum had coincidentally also died from complications related to type 2 diabetes, and also had very high cholesterol, including the symptoms that you can see in the eyes as well. So it was very, very obvious. And because of this, because my dad, he was very active. He's one of those mammals, you know, those middle-aged men in Lycra. He was definitely one of those, still is. It's very uncomfortable to see him in such tight Lycra, but, you know. And so I have two siblings, and we were all tested to see if we had high cholesterol. And what do you know? We all had high cholesterol. So we all had a suspected familial hypercholesterolemia, which, seeing as my dad definitely has it, he's had the genetic test, there's a very high chance that the three of us would all have it as well. I saw the endocrinologist, and he told me that we can't be absolutely sure if you have FH, but we're going to do another test in a year's time. If your cholesterol is still high, you'll probably have to go on statins. And, you know, as a 19, 20-year-old, I can't say that was something I was particularly keen on, the idea of starting to take drugs that I would have to take for the rest of my life. And I was told, go away for a year, try some things, try maybe some lifestyle modifications, try something, anything you like, and come back in a year and we'll see if it's made any difference. So naturally, the very first thing I did, I went to Dr. Google. I went straight to Google. I decided to Google what was wrong with me. I decided to find out as much as I possibly could. And unfortunately, with the nature of Dr. Google, I found a lot of woo. I found, one of the very first things I found was actually the I Quit Sugar program. I don't know if anyone's heard of this. This is something that a lady called Sarah Wilson came up with in Australia, and it's a sugar detox, essentially. So it's an 8-week program where you gradually detox yourself of sugar because, of course, sugar is the thing that is causing all of our current issues. And I did a version of this program. Partly, I didn't want to pay for it because I was a student and it was expensive. So I found a knockoff kind of version online and found a version based on all the blogs that I read. And it's very paleo-based, so it's very much focusing away from grains, especially away from sugar. The idea being that fructose is the thing that is poisoning us all. And so glucose is fine, but fructose is very bad. And we need to gradually detox ourselves off of it before we can then be in a state of better health. I followed a version of this program while I was studying for my exams. It was a little bit miserable, but I followed it, and I thought, this doesn't really seem like it's really working. It doesn't really feel like enough. I still feel like it isn't really making a difference. And so then I found the UK wellness bloggers. I decided it was probably a good idea to look a little bit closer to home. And I found some wonderful people such as Deliciously Ella. And as you can see, you know, awesome ingredients, incredible food that you and your body will love. Ah, doesn't that sound lovely? And then we have Madeline Shaw, you know, recipes that will nourish you from the inside out. And Honestly Healthy, The Alkaline Cleanse, all these wonderful books which you can still buy. And I thought, hey, look at all these people. Look at how amazingly radiant and healthy they look. Look, it's a tribe of white women who are mostly blonde. This is where I belong. Look at me. I fit this so perfectly. These are my people. And so I looked at all these different blogs I followed, and I found them primarily on social media. They were all on Instagram. They all had a huge presence on Instagram. They had the most amazing narratives. For example, Ella, who had cured herself of a variety of conditions, including postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome through her diet. Madeline Shaw had overcome, I think it was an eating disorder as well as various skin issues. Natasha Corrett, the whole alkaline thing, it was supposed to cure cancer. You know, it was supposed to be absolutely incredible and could do a whole host of amazing things. What all of these had in common is that they all encouraged restricting a huge amount of things from your diet. So they were saying it's all about health. You know, it's about being as healthy as you possibly can, but here's a list of foods that you need to avoid. Otherwise, all these foods that you're eating are going to be poisoning you. They're toxic. They're going to make you unhealthy. The reason why we're also unhealthy is because we're eating so many different foods that are killing us. And they were all on Instagram. They looked so beautifully radiant. They looked so healthy. They were exactly what I aspired to be at that point. And so my alternative persona was created on Instagram. Plant-based Pixie. It's got the same kind of ring. Honestly healthy. Madeline Shaw. Get the glow. Deliciously Ella. Plant-based Pixie. You see, it all kind of fits together. And that's why I created this persona who really likes avocados. This was from a photo shoot that I did a couple of years ago. I still sometimes use this picture because I do honestly really like avocados. But you know, if you look back at all these people who, you can look at all them laughing into salads, and here I am laughing at avocados because they're just so hilarious. And so here we have plant-based Pixie. I had the beautiful logo to go with it, lovely and green. Oh, look at me, I'm so wonderfully healthy. I was basically trying to be the next Deliciously Ella. That was my goal. I thought, wow, look at the amazing thing that these people are doing. Look at how they're trying to get others to be healthier. I want to be like that too. And so I created an Instagram account, and this is an example of what my Instagram account looked like. I think this is 2014. This is probably when I reached peak wellness, but how I got there was essentially I first cut out all animal products, similarly to what Deliciously Ella did. So no meat, fish, dairy, eggs, all that was gone from my diet pretty much overnight. The next thing I did was cut out gluten, because Madeline Shaw says that gluten is like sandpaper for the gut. And that sounds really painful and horrible, and I didn't want my gut to be destroyed. I wanted my gut to be healthy, and therefore I needed to cut out gluten, obviously. The next thing I did was cut out refined sugar. In case you didn't know, refined sugar isn't really a thing. But it's essentially saying that maple syrup is really good for you, but caster sugar is really bad. It just makes baking cakes a lot more difficult. That's about all it does. But I was convinced that refined sugar, because it was more processed, would be really bad for me, whereas if I consumed maple syrup and coconut sugar, it was more natural, less processed, and therefore was going to be doing me a whole load of good. I then cut out soy, because soy and hormones, soy disrupts your hormones, it gives you cancer, it's a terrible thing. And so I did that as well, which made, obviously, I mean, once you cut out animal products, things like tofu are kind of things that you tend to rely on for a lot of protein. Nah, I was having none of that whatsoever. Then I made my way towards the superfoods. And I'm not talking about things like blueberries. I'm not talking about things like kale. I'm going one step further. I'm talking about the superfood powders. These are really amazing. If you don't know, these are really exotic powders that come from all over different parts of the world that are supposed to be super, super nutrient dense and super amazing. And you have to have these in order to be healthy. So there's things like chlorella, which is an algae. There's spirulina, which is also an algae. And if you've never tried spirulina, it is honestly one of the most disgusting things you can ever eat in your life. If you think about how pond smells, that is how it tastes. It is so beyond vile that anyone who says that they like the taste, honestly, I can't believe a word they say, because they're obviously deluding themselves. But I was eating these things like maca powder, which is supposed to be like this Peruvian root, which is supposed to give you loads of energy. I replaced my coffee. I got rid of my coffee and I replaced it with maca powder mixed with coconut water, obviously, first thing in the morning. And I was taking chlorella tablets because they're supposed to detox you, especially after a flight, for example. Baobab was supposed to be the best source of vitamin C, so I was having that. And then obviously you have to complete the package with a bit of acai powder, because that's the super highest concentration of antioxidants. And always, if something is a good thing, you have to get as much of it as possible into a small concentrated space. So I was eating all the superfoods. you could possibly imagine, and also things like raw cacao, because cocoa powder is just so processed, but raw cacao is great, especially when you mix it with hot cooked porridge. Don't really understand how that made sense to me at the time. And then I went for the juice cleansers. As you can see, so I'm gradually going one step further all the time. It was never enough. There was always someone online who was doing things in a more extreme way, who seemed healthier, and I felt that I had to keep going, that what I was doing just wasn't enough. I just had to go further and further down to make myself healthier and healthier and healthier. So I started doing some juice cleansers. I didn't really do very many of these, to be fair, mainly as a one-day thing, on and off, because I really like food, and it was really hard to not eat, even just for a day. But I did the juice cleanse thing occasionally. I got all this stuff for free, by the way, in case you're wondering. I had an Instagram account. By this point, I think I had probably around 20 to 30,000 followers by the point of this picture. And so all these expensive superfoods, these expensive juice cleansers, I was getting them for free from the companies in exchange for posting about them on my social media. As a student, I would never have been able to afford these things, ever. There was just no chance I'd be able to spend £30 on a packet of 30 acai tablets. That just wasn't feasible. Or £80 for a 3-day juice cleanse. They are so expensive. But as a student, I lapped these things up because I knew there was no way I could afford them otherwise. And luckily, brands had spotted my account and decided to give me a lot of free shit, which at the time I was like, yes, I've made it. I'm getting free stuff. This is so cool. And then we go even further down the rabbit hole, I think, down to things like raw food challenges. So I'd collaborate with other bloggers and we'd say, hey, let's do a challenge of eating just raw food for a month. And it is, honestly, it is so unbearably miserable. I was eating overnight oats for breakfast, or smoothies generally most of the time for breakfast. For lunch, I would have a giant salad of basically salad vegetables. In the evening, I was eating courgette or zoodles, whatever you want to call them, which basically, if you think spaghetti is amazing, which you should, courgette is what you eat basically when you want spaghetti, but you're not hungry at all because it doesn't fill you up in any shape or form. And it's really miserable. It was a miserable existence. But what I was doing was not just doing this for myself. I was preaching about it on social media. I was saying how wonderful all this stuff was. And I even organized events. So one of these pictures you can see up there on the top right, where you can see lots of hands, that was one of the events I organized in London called the Plant-Based Picnics, which was basically an event where other people who were severely restricted and weren't eating very many things and had very strict rules about what they could and couldn't eat all gathered together and basically shared our wonderful wisdom because our friends didn't eat the same way we did, so we needed some kind of community space. So in a sense, I also enabled other people to have this kind of lifestyle by encouraging it through organizing these kinds of events, and they were very popular. It was kind of a potluck style thing, but we'd have tickets and they would always sell out really quickly. They were very popular, and it was really fun in a way to have that community aspect of meeting up with people in the real world as well as on social media. So I was a massive, massive wellness wanker, and just to really illustrate this, I'm going to bare my soul and share with you some of my very, very first posts that I posted on Instagram, which still exists on my Instagram account today. To be fair, I've deleted a lot of stuff, but this one is still there. And here we go, a heart-shaped, fully raw fruit platter as Valentine's Day is this week. This is from 2014. And I just want to highlight some of the really problematic aspects of this post. Firstly, fully raw. I was not fully raw, and there's absolutely no evidence that going fully raw is a really good idea in any shape or form. Paleo, I'm pretty sure that people who are very strictly paleo would say that this much fruit is probably not really ideal. I'm sure they're not that keen on that much fruit. So this really isn't paleo. 80-10-10 is a program designed by a doctor in America where the idea is that you eat 80% of your calories from carbs, 10% from fat, 10% from protein. And what that realistically means is that you eat a lot of fruit, a couple of vegetables, not really much else. You don't eat any kind of nuts and seeds and things like that because that would tip you far over into eating more than 10% of your calories from protein and fat. It was a very restrictive thing, but I knew if I included it as a hashtag, I would get more followers. Eat clean. This is probably the least favorite and the most problematic out of the hashtags on here. This idea of clean eating, this moral superiority that I had, this feeling that my diet was so superior to others. And I'm going to touch on this whole clean eating thing a little bit more in a second. And then detox. I mean, come on. detox, really. I think I'm assuming you're a well-educated enough audience to know that detox isn't a thing. You have a liver and a kidneys. They kind of do the whole detoxing thing for you. Fruit is definitely not going to detox you. It's not going to do absolutely anything. But I definitely fell for the whole detox thing. I thought that my body was absolutely dirty and I needed to clean it. I needed to cleanse it in some way in order to be healthy. So did all this stuff actually make me healthier? I guess that is the real question. At first, yes, it did at first. But obviously, that's because I went from being a student eating ready meals and going out all the time to suddenly eating a whole load of vegetables, cooking from scratch, and going to the gym and trying to sleep 8 hours a night. Obviously, that kind of transformation is going to lead to me feeling a bit better in myself, even if I had just incorporated a few extra vegetables into my diet. But then I started developing severe anxiety around what I was eating. Because of all these different rules, because of all this comparison on social media, it made me very anxious around what I was eating. I was worried, was I doing enough? Was I healthy enough? Was this thing that I'm eating, is it going to make me healthier? Is it going to make me unhealthy? Every tiny morsel that entered my body had to be very carefully scrutinized to see whether it matched up to the standards. I was tired all the time. And I suspect this is probably from a mild B12 deficiency. B12 deficiency usually takes around 2 to 3 years to manifest, and I was doing this for around 2 years of my life, 2 to 3 years, I think. So it's very likely that I had some semblance of a B12 deficiency because supplements were unnatural, and so I didn't take them. I was having all the superfoods, and one of the lies that superfood companies sell you is that they tell you that spirulina contains B12, even though it doesn't. So I was convinced I didn't need supplements, and actually I was probably just really deficient because I wasn't really eating very much at this point. I had no social life whatsoever. As you can imagine, eating so little in terms of variety doesn't really set you up for being really fun on a night out with people, especially when you start worrying about the calories and alcohol and all that kind of thing as well. And I actually, on my birthday while I was in my 3rd year of uni, I snuck into lectures late and I left the lectures early so that my friends wouldn't ask me to go to lunch with them because I knew they'd want to go to a Chinese buffet and I could not eat that. I knew that that was totally unclean, it was unacceptable, I couldn't eat that. So I spent my birthday eating a salad in my room on my own, which is not really a very healthy existence. My cholesterol actually went down at first, and then it went back up again. They still don't really know what's going on with my cholesterol, to be honest, because it just does this, and it fluctuates at a rate that is not supposed to really happen if it is genetic. So at the moment, there's really no real certainty as to what is going on with my cholesterol, but the point being that cutting out all these different foods actually didn't have the effect that I wanted it to. So overall, no. It really did not make me healthier. I was told that it would make me feel like I have so much energy that I'd be amazing. I'd be able to have super concentration. My skin would be glowing all the time. That is absolutely not what happened. It didn't do any of the things that it was promised. But I had kind of sold into this particular lifestyle. I was advocating it on social media. I could not escape it. I basically felt that I had to pretend that it was all working, because otherwise I was living a lie, and I couldn't deal with that at the time. And really what I had at that time, when I look back, is what is known as Orthorexia Nervosa. And this is not a very commonly known condition because it's not currently in the DSM, but it's been talked about, especially in the media, for the last couple of years, and there's been a growing body of research on it as well. And this is an unhealthy obsession with eating healthily. This is when trying to eat healthy is taken to the point where it is obsessive and dangerous and damaging both psychologically and physically, but especially to someone's social life. So there's it's kind of known by its increasingly restrictive food rules, as you can see by the fact what I did, first cutting out one thing, then the next, then the next, then the next. You constantly have to be more and more restrictive. There's this need for control, and that makes it very similar to other eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia, for example, this need to have some kind of control over your life through the food that you eat. But it differs from these eating disorders in the sense that the focus is not on weight at all. If there's no real focus on calories as such, there's no real focus on overall energy intake, the focus is purely on health. I was not tracking my weight. My weight was pretty much stable at the time. I was not tracking calories, macros, or anything like that. I was purely concerned with the purity and the healthful properties of the food I was eating and whether it was good enough, pure enough, healthy enough. It's very black and white. A food is either good or it's bad. It's healthy or it's unhealthy. It's either going to make me reach my goal of health or it's going to take me away from my goal of health. And it's characterized by a lot of anxiety as well. When you have that and that level of restrictive food rules, when you have all these thoughts around food, it's going to cause a huge amount of anxiety around what you're eating. And also, there's a lot of social isolation, as I think is very understandable. When you have these restrictive food rules, you can't really go out to eat in most places. There are very few restaurants that I could go to eat in London. Thankfully, I was living in London because that was probably the only place that I could maintain this in the UK, because London has some very, very weird and restrictive, like raw vegan restaurants, which are really quite impressive in the amount of woo that they have on their menu. So this, I think, ties back to the idea of the whole clean eating thing, because I was posting #clean eating, #eat clean, and what a lot of these wellness bloggers who I was following, what they were doing was they were preaching about clean eating. And I think this is a really interesting concept, because the definition of clean eating varies very much according to who you ask. If you ask Madeline Shaw, for example, she would have said at the time that clean eating meant not eating gluten, but you could eat things like meat and fish in small amounts. If you asked Deliciously Ella at the time, she would have said that clean eating meant cutting out all animal products and refined sugar. If you asked Natasha Corrett from Honestly Healthy what clean eating meant, and she describes herself as kind of the pioneer of this whole thing, she would have said that clean eating means eating an alkaline diet, which is basically lots of fruits and vegetables, not very much in the way of grains, beans, or just protein in general, to be honest, especially animal protein. So the definition of clean eating varies very much according to who you ask. But what they all have in common is not the types of foods that they restrict, but the attitude towards these foods. There's this very black and white thinking, this idea that there are clean foods, there are good foods that you should be eating, and that therefore means that there are dirty foods. And if you eat clean foods, you are a clean, pure, wholesome, good person. And if you don't eat these foods, that must mean that you are dirty. It must mean that you are unclean. It must mean that you're a bad person in some way. So it's very much tied to the whole moral aspect of what we eat, this idea of you are what you eat. If you eat clean foods, you will be a clean person. And so there's a lot of moral superiority that goes on. I think I definitely showed that in myself. I very much felt that my diet was, the way I was eating made me superior to other people who didn't eat that way. And it made me feel good about myself. I think that's one of the only ways you can maintain this kind of thing, is by honestly believing that the way you eat actually makes you a better person in some way. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so attached to it. But clean eating is a really insidious term, because it really is looking down on other people who eat differently to you. And it's very, very judgmental, and it's very nasty in lots of ways as well. And interestingly enough, when there was that whole clean eating backlash around sort of 2015, 2016, all of these bloggers, all of these people who I've mentioned before, all said, oh, that's not what we meant when we said clean eating. We don't really use the term clean eating. They distanced themselves from it without any acknowledgement of any potential wrongdoing that they had done, despite the fact that there are plenty of people who had basically been duped by them, who had become more unhealthy and restrictive and anxious and orthorexic as a result of what these people were saying. But there was no acknowledgement of any wrongdoing, and that I'm very, very uncomfortable with. So at some point, obviously, all this came crashing down. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here today. And the point where everything really changed for me was I was in Australia. And I was doing the whole gap year thing after my degree. And the natural thing that all wellness bloggers do when they go abroad is they find other wellness bloggers to hang out with, because those are the only people you can go to dinner with, to be honest. And part of the reason I wanted to be in Australia is because I knew there was a huge wellness community there. And I worked in an organic health food shop in Australia. I had basically no retail experience, but they hired me simply because I knew what all the weird and wonderful things that they sold were. If someone was looking for maca powder, I knew exactly what that was, what it supposedly did, and where they could find it, and what it would do for them. And so they hired me pretty much straight away, and I worked there for a few months. And I hung out with other wellness bloggers. We'd go for lunch, we'd go for dinner, we'd talk about the wonderful things we had in common, mainly the food we didn't eat. But the point where everything changed for me was a real light bulb moment, and it's where I was in a car and someone said this. They said, I would never dream of vaccinating my kids. And at that moment, I froze, and I thought, what the fuck am I doing with these people? I honestly... I couldn't believe that the people I was hanging out with had these kinds of beliefs that I knew were endangering other people in a serious, serious way. Now, what I find quite scary about this is that maybe in in another universe, I might have fallen down the rabbit hole even further and become an anti-vaxxer, and that idea is very scary to me because I would really hope that I would never do that. But luckily, this seemed to be the point for me where everything changed, when I thought, if these are the kind of people that I'm hanging out with and they're saying these kinds of things, how can I possibly align myself with what they're saying, because they are harming other people. It is really, really dangerous. So this was the light bulb moment for me. And I thought to myself, if they're preaching these kinds of ideas that are so wrong and so damaging, what else is there that they've been saying that I have totally believed and was totally, totally wrong? And so what I did is I didn't say anything at that moment in the car because I was so shocked, but I went home and I started reassessing everything that I thought that was true around food and health. And coincidentally, around that time, the Belle Gibson scandal broke. And Belle Gibson, for those of you who don't know, is an Australian wellness blogger who claimed that she healed her terminal brain cancer through a very specific diet. It was a very healthy diet. It was a very clean diet. It was a clean diet. She had an amazing app and a best-selling book in Australia, which was due to be published in the UK as well. But then it came out that actually she didn't heal her terminal brain cancer with diet because she never had brain cancer in the first place. She lied to the whole world about this, made a huge amount of money, and had this amazing book deal and this app which was picked up by Apple as well and was featured on all their advertisements for the Apple Watch. And the people I was working with were saying things like, oh no, obviously there must be some kind of mistake because she's such a wonderful person. But these two things together, I started Googling a little bit more about the Belle Gibson scandal and what people were saying about it. And then I stumbled across Skeptic's websites who were talking about the Belle Gibson scandal, including things like Science-Based Medicine, Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, all these things, which are amazing. And I found these, and I started reading everything, and I thought, hang on a second. This feels very, very alien. And so I took everything that they were saying and I went back to the original source material. I went back to the original research because, in case I didn't mention, my first degree was in biochemistry. Yes, I had a science degree and I fell for all this bollocks, which surprisingly happens a lot. So I used that. I used the fact that I still had access to a certain degree through the university institution. I could access all the research papers. I knew how to read a research paper. And so I used that to my advantage and decided to go back to all the original research and realized that what these websites were saying was true, and everything that I'd believed was a total lie and was basically there just to make money for the most part. And this was very, very scary to me at first, and so I didn't really share this with anyone at the time. And there was a long period of cognitive dissonance for me, because it was very scary to have all these ideas challenged. I tackled them slowly, one at a time. But even just, if you look at these pictures, which I think are from around 2015, 2016, this is what my Instagram account looked like at the time, I was doing myth-busting posts. As you can see, there's one that says chlorophyll, green myths. I was writing about how this idea that chlorophyll oxygenates your blood is a total myth. And I was writing these myth-busting posts. But at the same time, I was really afraid to be honest online because I'd built this following. By this point, I had reached, I think, around 80,000 followers, something like that, 80 to 100,000 followers online. And I felt I couldn't be honest online because I'd built up this whole community, I built up this whole profile, this whole persona based on this person and based on these rules and these ideas around food. And so it was very scary to then implement that online. And so it took a long time for me to do that. I was still saying a lot of bullshit. Some of these things that you can see in here, everything here is still very much vegan and mostly gluten-free. Vegan gluten-free waffles are really hard to make, and they do not taste good. And there's these little raw pots as well. These are pots of raw desserts I was advertising on there as well. A lot of salads, a lot of still very vegan gluten-free stuff. But I started a nutrition degree because I was really angry at all these wellness bloggers who had spouted so much misinformation online. And I was angry at how they distanced themselves from all that. And I was angry that they were spreading nutrition information online even though they had no qualifications. And I thought, hang on a second, I don't have any nutrition qualifications. That makes me a little bit of a hypocrite. Why don't I go and do a nutrition master's? So that's what I did. I did a nutrition master's. And even while I was still in the early stages of that, I was still quite scared to post about things online. And that's because I really like this quote. This asking someone to question their relationship to a food they've eliminated is like asking someone to change religions. I so firmly identify with that and believe that. And it's It's so true, especially in the case of myself. I was so attached to this way of eating. It was so much part of my identity. I'd even created this persona, although that Instagram account is now what my Instagram account is now. It used to be Plant-Based Pixie, of course. But I was so tied to this persona. This was me. People would come up to me on the street and say, "Oh, you're Plant-Based Pixie." That was who I was. That was my identity. And I really struggled to get away from that. It was almost like having to kill off someone and become a new person. And that was very, very scary. But I eventually, slowly got there and became what I describe as a wellness rebel. I think it sounds pretty cool. And now what I do online especially is I post about facts and getting people away from fear. So promoting food positivity. Having spent all these years of my life cutting out foods one at a time and eliminating so many foods, I wanted to encourage people now to enjoy their food and eat as many different foods as possible and say how all these foods are really, really wonderful. And also promoting a healthy skepticism, promoting this idea that people should question what they read on social media, particularly on Instagram, because on Instagram you can't provide links to references. It's very much an echo chamber, and you very much see exactly what you want to, and you shut anything out that you don't want to. There's no room for questioning beliefs on Instagram. And so here's an example of a post I did recently. Just to give a bit of context, the average post that I do on Instagram gets between 30 to 50 comments. But here I posted about eggs, specifically the fear-mongering around eggs. I even referenced, kind of, and it got 267 comments. And most of those are from militant vegans who got very angry with me for promoting eggs. That's the way it was portrayed, as I'm promoting eggs, I'm promoting the egg industry. This idea that, oh, eggs are chicken periods, and that's really disgusting, so we shouldn't eat them. That's physiologically so wrong. They're not periods in any way. They're actually just eggs. That's why we call them eggs. But I got a lot of comments telling me that I'm a horrible person, I'm a terrible person. How dare I do this on social media? I thought that you were vegan, why are you doing this? Even though I actually never used the word vegan to really advertise myself. So I got a lot of hate for these kinds of messages, and all I'm doing with this is trying to dispel some myths around eggs, specifically the myth around the whole chicken periods thing, but also the idea that the cholesterol you eat doesn't really impact your blood cholesterol, and so eating eggs is not going to magically raise your cholesterol super high, those kind of things. It wasn't a promotion of the food, it was neither against the food, it was simply dispelling the myths around that particular food. People don't really like that very much. And the other thing that I do is I like to call out charlatans on social media now. And this really doesn't make me particularly popular. This is a recent post of mine calling out the medical medium, who is a guy in America. Why are they always from America? Who he has no medical degree, but he talks to a spirit. And the spirit gives him medical advice, which he shares to his over 1 million followers on social media. And these are things like cucumbers are alkalizing. That is definitely not a thing. The asparagus cleanses and balances the liver, which is great, seeing as the liver is the thing that does the cleansing. And there's just so much bollocks. So you get some nice comments, the occasional, this is insane, good job calling out the Nutribollocks, that was nice. But this doesn't always make me particularly popular. These are some of the comments that I've left up on the post. It's really sad you didn't read his book or do research. I don't want to pay for this guy's book. I don't want to give him my money. He doesn't deserve it. Do research. His stuff works. Oh, wow, this is so condescending and ignorant of you. And occasionally I like to be really sassy and respond like, yeah, science is so ignorant. Sometimes I get really sassy with people. For the most part, when I get really, really rude or really, really ignorant or really aggressive comments, I always make sure to either argue back or delete them, because otherwise I don't want people who are reading the comments to think that what these people are saying is by any means true. So I spend a lot of emotional energy arguing with people online about things like the medical medium. But sometimes it's worth it, because you get nice comments from people who actually say, oh, I unfollowed this guy now because I can see that he's really doing a lot of damage. And that, to be honest, it makes it so much more worthwhile to have to deal with all the bullshit that I have to counter on a regular basis. And the other thing I do is I tell people that it's okay to make mistakes. I use my own experiences to basically share with people that it's totally okay for them to have fallen for nutrition myths, because we all do. And honestly, from my experience, especially within the more skeptical and scientific community as well, is that a lot of people think they're skeptics until it comes to food. Food is still such a personal thing that is so much tied to our identity that we find it very difficult to challenge our beliefs around food. And so I like to tell people that I fell for nutrition myths. I did these things. It's okay if you've done them too. But the point is that we can all try and do better in the future. So acknowledge your mistakes, acknowledge that it's okay, because if we don't say it's okay to make mistakes, it doesn't allow people to try and change and do better in the future. It basically says you're wrong and that's not okay. And so I'm trying to get people to maybe rethink their ideas around food and also acknowledge that, hey, it's okay for them to have made those mistakes in the past because they're trying to move to a better place now. So I think it's kind of interesting to see, why do people fall for nutrition pseudoscience? Because it happens a lot. As I said, a lot of people think they're skeptics and very scientifically minded until it comes to food. Mistaking correlation for causation is a big one, and you see this especially with foods like gluten, and that was the case for me. There was this, I had this idea that, I ate pasta a few times and I felt a little bit bloated afterwards, therefore it must be the gluten that was causing my problems. Even though it was actually the fact that I was eating spaghetti, I wasn't chewing it properly because I was slurping it, and that meant it was digested not quite as well, and that meant I got more gut symptoms. And that's a really popular one. Desperation, if you have a health scare or things like a cancer diagnosis, chronic illness, all these things, I think it is so understandable that people are willing to try absolutely everything to make themselves feel better. I think it's so understandable, and I think that's a really common reason as to why people fall for nutrition pseudoscience in particular. The whole diet culture and societal aesthetic ideals, although orthorexia is very much about health, there is still this idea that if you are thin, if you are healthy looking, that means you are a better person because you're not a burden on the NHS, you are superior, you are seen as being of more value to society if you look a certain way, and looking healthy and being healthy is absolutely part of that. This fear of judgment, I think it's very clear that most of us have some kind of ingrained bias towards people who don't look healthy, especially people in larger bodies. And if you see the amount of abuse, I think, I don't know if people saw the Tess Holliday Cosmopolitan cover, the amount of abuse that she got online simply for existing in a body that was hers was unbelievably awful. And there's that huge amount of judgment. If a person in a larger body is seen eating a pizza, it's like, you're disgusting, what are you doing? Whereas if a thin person eats a pizza, it's like, you go girl, you've got an appetite. So there's that very much that judgmental attitude that we have towards other people's eating habits. Also, we really like simple solutions. It's very nice to think that I'm unhealthy because I'm eating the wrong things. If I just cut this out, I will be healthy. It's nice and simple. Unfortunately, nutrition is never that simple unless it's an allergy, pretty much. Fear-mongering tactics, I mean, there is so much fear-mongering around specific foods, around specific ways of eating, around health, so much of that out there, and I think that really drives people in the direction of pseudoscience. And also online personas with no nutrition training who are trying to make money, and yes, I used to be one of those, absolutely, I admit that. I donated all the money I made from, which wasn't very much, to be fair, it wasn't very much, but I got a commission from a superfood company. I donated all that to an eating disorders charity because I felt that was the right thing to do, and I actually got people to vote on which charity I should send them to. I tried to tell the company that I did this, but they blocked me because they really don't like what I do. And if I take all these examples and attribute them to myself as an example, yes, 100%, I was looking at gluten as a very much an example of mistaking correlation for causation. I was definitely in a place where I felt quite desperate because I didn't want to take statins. I wanted to try something. I was really desperate to find a solution that didn't involve taking drugs. Yes, I was very much focused. Societal influences about health influence us all. There's no escaping from them. That was absolutely playing a role. Fear of judgment, yes, especially when I was trying to get away from that movement. It was really difficult because I thought I would be judged, and I was judged so harshly for starting to reintroduce new foods into my diet. Simple solutions, of course. I really wanted a simple solution that would make me healthier. Fear-mongering tactics, yes. I was told that if I ate dairy, it would make my bones brittle because apparently dairy leaches calcium from my bones. It really doesn't. I was told that all these different foods were going to do me great harm. There was a lot of fear-mongering tactics. And yes, I fell for all these online personas who were trying to make money through their books, through their various, supplement affiliations and their sponsored posts and all that. And I fell for these online personas who were trying to make money. So just to kind of finish up, just a kind of a little bit about completing the journey, completing the cycle and what I do now is I have a private nutrition clinic. So I graduated from my master's degree in nutrition. I published my dissertation in a journal, which was very cool. And I now run a private nutrition clinic in South London where I primarily help people who have disordered attitudes around food, and especially people who have orthorexia. Because I find a lot of people come to me because they have seen my personal experience and they recognize that I actually really understand what it's like to be in that space, what it's like to have all these fear-mongering ideas around food and what it's like to be anxious around food. And so they come to me to try, and now I use all that experience as well as all the scientific knowledge I have and all the training to try and help those people. I also work as a social media science communicator a little bit. I like that as a much nicer way rather than saying influencer, which I really hate as a word. As a cool thing, apparently I'm an influential person in London now. The Evening Standard says I'm one of the most influential people in London. So hey, that's pretty cool, I guess. Very weird. I'm occasionally on TV. Very occasionally. Here, I was on BBC World News talking about the Belle Gibson scandal. They asked me to come on because they knew that I used to follow her, that I was in Australia at the time, and now knowing the work that I do, that's always pretty cool. I'm a lecturer at UCL now. I studied at UCL. They've asked me to come back and teach on the course that I took a couple of years ago, so that's very cool as well. And I do guest lectures at some other universities, particularly in London as well. I'm an author, which is very, very weird to me. I wrote a book all about my experiences in the wellness industry and tackling a lot of the myths that the wellness industry promotes, like this idea that refined sugar is toxic, or that we all need to go on a detox, or things like that gluten is killing us all, and I wrote that in the book, The Wellness Rebel. The cover, I know it looks a little bit wanky, but it was kind of to poke fun at all these wellness bloggers who are laughing into salad by, I'm throwing spinach, so hilarious. And that came out early this year. I think you can actually buy that outside, so go buy it. And I'm in the process of writing another book at the moment. I feel like, I've really taken on the wellness industry, and now I feel like, hey, why not take on the diet industry at the same time? So that's what I'm doing with my next book, which is out next year, which is the No Need to Diet book, where I basically tackle some of the issues around what we perceive to be health and healthy, and how a lot of that is very misguided and actually making us, as a population, more unhealthy. And everything I do is basically continuously learning and working on making up for the mistakes I've made. I feel such a strong urge. I have so much anger inside me at all these people who duped me and who made me so unwell. And I'm trying to channel all of that anger into something positive, which occasionally means doing a lot of swearing and ranting online, but also means just trying to help other people either get out of that space or not get into that space in the first place. So that's really what drives everything that I do now, is that anger, that frustration, and that, to a certain extent, there's a little bit of guilt and shame of having fallen for that and promoting all of that. All I'm doing now is trying to make up for that and do better in the future. So that's me. Thanks.
Pixie, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bearing your egg and pasta-filled soul at us. So we do have time for questions. You know how the questions work. If you have a question, come up to the questioning mic, which, as previously detailed, has been set at average skeptic height, which is no one's height, because averages don't work that way. We have a question there. Can we have the first question, please, Cindy?
Yeah, the cover of your upcoming book seemed to have your old plant-based pixie name on it. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, so my publishers insisted that it had to be on there because otherwise there was no continuity, and the booksellers and various other people had to recognize that it was not my first book, that it was my second one, and so they'd be more likely to stock it. So I had to keep that there for a sense of continuity as well, and so that people would still be able to find me based on the old stuff that I'd done. Not really my choice, but I kind of had to keep it there, and you know what, it kind of makes sense.
Second question, thank you very much.
Hi, fascinating talk.
It's laughably low, isn't it?
I'm making up for the previous one. No, fascinating talk, thank you. So two quick questions. So do you know what happened to the women who got you into this movement? Are they still...
The what, sorry?
Do you know what happened to the women you showed earlier who got you into this movement? Are they still keeping up the same persona?
Oh, they're hugely popular. Deliciously Ella now has her latest cookbook came out just this summer. And she has a couple of cafes in London. She has a podcast. She has over 1 million followers now. Wow. She is just super, super successful. But she's kind of rebranded a little bit in the sense that she's now saying, oh, it's not about eating clean. I'm just trying to make vegetables sexy and wonderful.
Okay.
Whereas people like Honestly Healthy is now no longer Honestly Healthy. She is just Natasha Corrett. And her and Madeline Shaw have both had kids. And they are now focusing on being wellness mamas and not promoting the same bullshit they were before, but kind of still promoting the same bullshit as before. Yeah. None of these people have really diminished in popularity. They are still hugely, hugely popular online, and their books are still bestsellers.
Okay. And are there also men in this world, or is it...
You've got people like the body coach, Joe Wicks, who I absolutely fucking hate so much. I mean... He's beyond awful. And this is the interesting thing, in the media, when the whole clean eating backlash was happening, a lot of the stick was given to all the women, and the men really kind of came away scot-free, which is also kind of annoying. But there are plenty of men out there. In the UK, less so. But in the US, it's mainly men who are doing all this. You've got people like the Food Babe as well, but a lot of the kind of the lifestyle medicine doctors in the US are really the problematic ones. Here we have people like the Body Coach, who are just absolute twats.
Thanks.
You heard it here first. You didn't hear it here first. Brilliant. Just slow it down. I'm so sorry.
What's your take on organic? Is it all a con?
Yeah.
Right. Cancelling my veg box for Monday.
To elaborate a little bit more, I guess, from a scientific perspective, there's no real conclusive evidence that organic is necessarily better. What matters more is the soil that it's grown in, for example, and conditions like that. But also, I would rather people buy 10 different types of non-organic vegetables than buy 5 types of organic vegetables, because it means people are eating more of a variety of different foods, and that to me is more important, that people eat a variety of different vegetables, for example, and actually are able to afford all the different amazing foods that are out there.
Next question, please.
Hi. How do you deal on social media speaking to people who have chronic illnesses and say, well, it worked for me? Example, I have IBS. There is a dietary approach that has been scientifically studied, which is the FODMAP plan. And gluten is not a trigger, but wheat is. So we have a lot of conversations online with people that say, I've cut out gluten and it's made me feel better. And then it's not starting an argument as such, but it's trying to educate them. So how do you go about that?
It's really, really difficult. I think the worst thing you can do is kind of dismiss their ideas and make them feel like they're doing something wrong or feeling inferior. I think it's a very difficult thing to navigate. I think it's a lot of asking questions and being empathetic, but also kind of saying, well, I have a slightly different view on things, or here's something interesting that I've read. Would you be interested in hearing more about that? Or would you be interested in hearing this really interesting research that I've read about? And trying to framing it from a position of curiosity rather than teaching or being condescending. But it is really difficult, and to a certain extent you have to let people come to that conclusion on their own sometimes, or otherwise direct them towards chronic illness bloggers who are doing really, really good things. For example, I direct everyone towards a chronic illness blogger called Natasha Lippman, because she writes about her experiences with the wellness industry and how actually through her chronic illness drove her to do all this crazy wellness stuff, and now she's kind of moved away from that and realized that a lot of it is a load of bollocks. But it's a really, really tricky thing to do. And a lot of, when I see people like that, especially in clinic, it's a lot of asking questions, a lot of trying to understand where these ideas that they have come from, and maybe challenging the sources of those ideas, so it feels less like you're attacking them as a person. But it takes a lot of time.
Thank you. That was a great question. Thank you.
Hi. My 5-year-old started school last year and became best friends with this very sweet little girl. And it turns out, I realise now, her mother is orthorexic. She's in the playground every day talking about things. She's written a book on baby reflux. For me, it sounds like BS. And I wonder, the other mummies, whenever I've said something like, I feel like what her mother's doing to her own kids in restricting their diets, they're 5 and 3. She's making them terrified of food. I wonder what kind of impact that's going to have on their relationship with food. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a very healthy one. And also, other mothers who I've mentioned, I think that might be neglectful. They kind of look at me and I think, oh God, that's a bit strong. Other people sort of have a tendency to lean towards what she's saying because she's authoritative. So it's like, how on earth do you deal with people like that?
Yeah.
Rather than take your child out of that school because you've become best friends with their child.
Yeah, that's difficult because, to be honest, it is probably, in all likelihood, going to have a negative impact on them in the future. To be honest, I'm really curious, like all these kids from all these wellness bloggers now, I'm really intrigued to see how much they're going to rebel against that in the future. It's going to be so interesting.
But I think, they rebel, or will they have... They're going to have issues with food, surely. Like, their mummy's telling them, don't eat this, don't eat that. You can't go to a party because there might be sugar.
Yeah, and to be honest, there's not really that much you can do without feeling like you're parenting someone else's kids. I think the main thing probably you need to focus on is actually protecting your own kids and making sure that they understand that food is a wonderful thing and that all foods are acceptable and great, and there's no such thing as a bad food, and there's no such thing as a food that you have to necessarily be afraid of, and just kind of making sure that you're being a really good role model and maybe negating some of that negative influence that they're receiving. But there's not really, to be honest, there's not really much you can do without it seeming like you're trying to parent someone else. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is just the case. You just have to let people do their thing and come to these points at some point on their own in the future, which is really depressing and really hard.
Okay, that's a tough question to know. But I'm sorry, we're out of time, and it's my fault for not saying that wasn't not saying that was the last question. I'm so sorry. There is time to ask more questions if you come and buy Pixie's book. That's my plug. Commission in the post. Please do. Copies of your book are outside. You can either hang out here and sign them, or if you'd like to go to the merch store.
I'm actually doing a panel in about 5 minutes, so
okay,
I'm going to have to run to that. But I've been hanging around all weekend, so I'm going to be here.
Amazing, fantastic. So approach Pixie with a book. And a huge round of applause again for bearing your soul at Nat Talk. That was fantastic. Thank you so much.